Without further ado, please help me in welcoming to the stage the Barbara Bass Baker, Director and CEO of the Asian Art Museum, Dr. Jay Xu.
Good morning. Thank you for spending your Sunday at this very eventful program at the Asian Art Museum. Thank you, Rob. Particularly warm welcome to our speakers traveling from not so near and very far as well. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Phoenix Kingdom International Symposium, New Perspectives and Discoveries on Bronze Age Archaeology of the Middle Yangtze River region. We have 9 wonderful speakers from across the US and China. They have made extensive, groundbreaking contributions to the field of archaeology and art history, discoveries, and research. Today, they will share their valuable insights on topics related to our special exhibition, Phoenix Kingdoms, the last splendor of China's Bronze Age. Speaking of this exhibition, let me point out that the exhibition journey started on December the 2nd, 2017, at the Hubei Provincial Museum in Wuhan, where our 2 museums signed the initial MOU to begin the process. We did not, certainly, expect the project would eventually take 6.5 years to realize. Twice delayed due to the pandemic and its aftermath, but truly, as suggested by the title of the exhibition, the Phoenix is reborn. While there are so many people to thank for making this exhibition possible, I want to single out 3 particular colleagues. That is, Mr. Fang Qing, then Director of the Hubei Provincial Museum, and now Director of the Hubei Provincial Institute of Archaeology and Cultural Heritage, whose steadfast support and guidance enabled this long, arduous journey to reach its destination. Zheng Pan, Director of the exhibitions at the Hubei Provincial Museum, and our very own fan, Jeremy Zhang, Curator of Chinese Art at our museum. May I ask the 3 of them stand up to be recognized, please? Many, many thanks to the 5 museums in Hubei for sharing their treasures featured in the Phoenix Kingdoms exhibition. And I want to give a special thanks to the many supporters and exhibition sponsors, including Fred Eichner, who was our lead sponsor, Monica Yung Arima and the Asian Arima, Patty S. Chu and the Colbert T. Dare, Virginia and Timothy Fu, and many more, all listed in our donor acknowledgement screen at the entrance of the exhibition. Now we've digitized our donor recognition. So if you are willing to spend 2 minutes, you will be able to see everybody on the loop. And this symposium is also a major collective effort. I would like to take a moment to thank Bei Shan Tang Foundation for their generous support in making this symposium possible and for serving as a co-sponsor, co-organizer of the symposium along with the Hubei Provincial Museum and, of course, the Asian Art Museum. I would also like to thank our museum symposium team for making this happen. Now, please allow me to welcome our keynote speaker, Robert Bagley, Professor Emeritus of the Department of Art and Archaeology at Princeton University. Professor Bagley.
Thank you, Jay. The Phoenix Kingdoms exhibition focuses on 2 ancient states. Down here in the Middle Yangtze region, the state of Zeng there and the state of Chu, which are on opposite sides of the Han River here, a tributary of the Yangtze. In the 5th and 4th centuries BC, the Warring States period, this area was the south. Beijing is up here. The Yangtze flows into the sea at Shanghai. The Chu state was a major player in Warring States politics. It looms large in the written record. And archaeologists have been excavating Chu sites since the 1930s. By contrast, Zeng is barely mentioned in ancient texts. It was little more than a name until 1978, when some workers leveling the top of a hill in modern Suzhou, discovered the tomb of a ruler called Marquis Yi of Zeng. Yi's tomb is the richest yet known from the entire Chinese Bronze Age. And I want to spend most of my time unpacking it. But I will also glance at the burial of an otherwise ordinary Chu woman who was astonishingly well dressed. Then I will conclude with some thoughts about characterizing Zeng culture and Chu culture and the cultures of the North and South. Here you see Yi's tomb about to be opened. You're looking at the roof of a timber structure that fills the bottom of a shaft cut into sandstone bedrock. What the photograph doesn't tell you is that the shaft was originally more than 35 feet deep. By the time this picture was taken, the surrounding ground had been dug away. Perhaps we should be visualizing something more like this. This is another tomb at Suzhou, maybe the tomb of Yi's successor. But Yi's tomb differs in several ways. First, it's twice the size of the one on the right, and the shaft was vertical rather than stepped. Second, the excavators didn't find a ramp. They think the tomb never had one, but it's possible that they dug through a ramp without realizing it. It's hard to imagine how the tomb could have been built and furnished at the bottom of a vertical shaft 35 feet deep. Third, the shape is irregular. The structure on the right is cross-shaped with a burial chamber in the center and side compartments for grave goods. In Chu tombs, the timber structure is usually a rectangular box with compartments. The Marquis's tomb doesn't look like other tombs, and it doesn't imitate the floor plan of a palace either. It's unique, and as far as I know, nobody has a good explanation for it. To reach the timber structure, the excavators had to dig through the shaft fill, thin layers of differently colored soils pounded hard. Halfway down the shaft was a paving of large stones. When the excavators removed the paving and the fill below it, they came to a layer of sticky gray-green clay. Then came the layer of charcoal that you see here. 6 tons of charcoal was packed on and around the timber structure. The sticky clay and the charcoal may have been intended to protect the contents of the tomb from decay. Under the charcoal, the roof timbers were covered by a bamboo lattice and a layer of silk. Now the archaeologists have begun removing the roof. Under it, they're going to find 4 chambers. The west chamber here contained the lacquered coffins of 13 young women who accompanied their lord in death. The east chamber contained the Marquis's coffin and the coffins of 8 more women. The central chamber had utensils for food and drink and feasting, and the instruments of a large musical ensemble. And the north chamber there had all sorts of things, weapons, armor, horse gear, wine barrels, and even some documents pertaining to the funeral ceremony. So while the tomb doesn't have the plan of a building, it may have represented one. The Marquis's bedchamber in the east, the great hall of his palace in the center, some sort of storeroom on the north, and maybe the women's quarters in the west chamber, women who might have been musicians as well as concubines. When the first roof timbers were removed, it could be seen that the tomb was full of water. You're looking across the central chamber there toward the east chamber where the Marquis is. The north chamber is over here. The man standing there is on the partition that separates the central chamber from the west chamber. The timbers are square and 1.5 feet in cross-section, so a stack of 6 timbers makes a wall 9 feet high. Ancient tomb robbers tunneled through the shaft fill and cut a small hole in the corner of the central chamber's roof, but they gave up without entering the chamber, presumably because of the water. Here you see 2 lacquered coffins floating in the west chamber. Anything floating needs to be removed before the tomb is drained. The coffins will be loaded onto those pallets and then hoisted out. As draining proceeded, the tomb furnishings came into view. Here, a set of bells is emerging in the central chamber. You see 2 tiers of bells, but a 3rd tier with the biggest bells is still underwater. This is the short arm of an L-shaped stand made of lacquered wood with bronze fittings. Underwater, the stand supported 2.5 tons of bronze for 2,400 years. But from the moment the water was gone, the excavation was a continuous crisis of conservation, a rush to save the wood and other perishables. Now the biggest bells have emerged from the water. This is the short arm. The next slide is a view of the central chamber taken from behind the short arm. Notice the 2 poles here leaning against the long arm. Those were used for playing the largest bells. Here you see the bells as displayed today in the Hubei Provincial Museum. This is the largest set of bells known from ancient China, and by far the most remarkable. It was played by 5 musicians who struck the small bells on the middle tier with mallets and the large bells on the bottom tier with the 2 poles. The bells are labeled with their pitches, and they still sound those pitches. The pitches span 5 octaves, and 3 of the 5 octaves are chromatic. In other words, those 3 octaves can play the same sequence of notes you find on a piano. This is a playable 2,400-year-old musical instrument labeled with its pitches. There's nothing like it anywhere else in the world, and it is tuned to our musical scale. Since there is no historical connection between the Western chromatic scale and the Marquis of Zeng's chromatic scale, that's a fact with major implications for musical acoustics. It means that the chromatic scale is not an arbitrary cultural construction, it's something built into human hearing. These bells are not included in the exhibition because the Chinese government has decreed that they can never leave China. I'm not going to say anything more about them because if I get started, I won't stop. But notice that the beams that they hang from are supported by bronze figures of men wearing swords. Oddly enough, those are the only swords in the tomb. Their robes were brightly painted with lacquer, but most of the paint has flaked off. The men are dignified and well-dressed, and their faces are sensitively depicted. Nevertheless, their role is that of servants. These are the finest human figures that we know from China up to this time, and like all their predecessors, they are anonymous. To their original viewers, they must have looked very avant-garde. The Marquis of Zeng was pushing the boundaries. I should point out 2 bells. This is the largest in the set. It's 5 feet high, weighs 440 pounds, and it sounds a pitch 2 octaves below middle C. This one, the only one in the lower tier that hangs vertically, doesn't belong to the Marquis's set. It was a gift contributed cast by the Chu King as a gift for Marquis Yi's funeral. And its inscription gives us our date for the tomb, 433 BC. The bells made by the Marquis are not dated, but they're all inscribed, Marquis Yi of Zeng made this to cherish and use always. Most of the other bronzes in the tomb have the same inscription. Here you see those 2 bells being hoisted out of the tomb. The bells were part of an ensemble of 20 instruments. Near the north wall of the chamber, right there, is this set of chime stones covered in mud. The chime stones also play a chromatic scale. This is a stringed instrument coming out of the mud. It's a lacquered wood zither. It landed on top of the chime stones when the when the tomb was drained. There were 7 of these. There were also flutes, panpipes, mouth organs, and drums. The 2 excavators down here are looking at a big drum. It has lost its drum heads, and the pole that supported it has snapped. The most remarkable thing about it is the base that supported it, this thing. This is a bewildering 3-dimensional inlace of frenzied dragons, 16 big ones and countless small ones, clawing, biting, and swallowing one another. In overhead view, believe it or not, the design is symmetrical. If you rotate it 180 degrees, it looks unchanged. I'll show you a couple of details. In the exhibition, you can spend hours trying to figure out which head belongs to which tail. You can also spend hours trying to figure out how somebody designed this. Interlace of any kind is scarce in Yi's tomb. 3-dimensional interlace is scarce anywhere. This tail belongs to this head. The central chamber also contained bronze vessels for food and wine. The wine vessels are lined up along the east wall there. Maybe the Marquis and his guests listened to music while they partied. The food vessels are behind the short arm of the stand, but they're not visible in this photograph. Let me start with the wine vessels. I show you a photograph taken from the back of the chamber looking forward along the east wall. The drum is there in the back. In front of it are 2 enormous vases for wine. Here they're being lifted out of the tomb. In front of them are 2 big wine coolers or wine warmers. One of these is in the exhibition. Here you see it taken apart. The outer container was filled with ice or hot water. The inner container held the wine. The lid of the outer container goes on first, then the lid of the inner one on top of it. When the guests need refills, the inner lid is removed and the wine is ladled out. Nearby was a box of 16 wine cups made of lacquered wood. These are the earliest known examples of a type that was standard in later centuries. This is a plan of the central chamber. You see the bell stand, the drum, the wine vessels over here, the chime stones up there, This box had the lacquer cups, and there is one of the zithers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. They must have floated around as the tomb filled with water. The vessels for cooking and serving food are down here, lined up in sets. Here they are at a later moment in the excavation. The food vessels are very different from the wine vessels. They form bigger sets of smaller vessels, and their decoration is different. One of these four, 1, 2, 3, 4, one of those is in the exhibition. It's actually for water, not food. It looks like something painted. That smooth surface is red copper inlaid into dark bronze. By contrast, the decoration of the wine vessels is texture, not color, gritty high relief. The wine and food vessels seem to belong to different worlds. They differ in size, shape, decoration, sets, and location in the tomb. The food was perhaps a ritual offering to the deceased Marquis, but we probably shouldn't try to sort the tomb furnishings into things from this life and things for the next life. Tombs blur the boundary. I don't show you anything from the West Chamber, but in the North Chamber, we should look at the documents about the funeral ceremony. They were written on slips of bamboo tied together with cords. I show you an example from a later tomb on which the cords survive. This is from a much later tomb. When the slips are tied together, they form a bamboo mat that can be rolled up like a scroll. In North China, where writing was invented, we know from indirect evidence that writing on bamboo with brush and ink goes back at least to the 13th century BC. But the first actual examples found anywhere are the ones from Marquis Yi's tomb. They list funeral guests from neighboring states and the gifts they brought, such as horses and chariots. The guests included Chu officials, maybe even the king of Chu. The Marquis's scribes used very long strips, over 2 feet long. In the left image there, one of the strips has been cut into 3 pieces so that it could be reproduced in an excavation report that's not 2 feet high. Now let's go to the East Chamber and look at the Marquis in his double coffin. His outer coffin is enormous. Compare it with the normal coffins in the West Chamber. I show you a photograph of the East Chamber looking west toward his coffin. It was built of wood panels set into a bronze frame, and it weighs 6 tons. It sits at a tilt with its lid ajar, apparently because when it was being lowered into the chamber, it fell and struck the wall. The chamber had a few gold vessels, that one is in the exhibition, and many lacquers. The gold objects are poorly cast with rough surfaces and coarse decoration. Casting gold is tricky because of the speed at which the metal cools, and the Chinese caster's experience was with bronze. But the best of the lacquers are very fine. This cup was made by a master wood carver and then colored by the lacquer painter. Seen from overhead, the lid medallion is an intricate design of 3 floppy-eared dragons facing outward from the center. But seen from the side, it's a spiky landscape of sharp-cut peaks, very different from the gentle bumps on the handles. The Marquis's tomb contained hundreds of lacquers and hundreds of bronze vessels and bells. Most of his bronzes are inscribed, Marquis Yi of Zeng made this. Not one of his lacquers bears his name. The two materials had different functions and histories and status. This is one of 5 lacquer chests found behind the Marquis's coffin. At least one of them was for clothing. By comparison with the cup you were just looking at, the painting is pretty sloppy. A cup from the Marquis's dinner table was more important. On the left, you see a bronze bird with antlers standing in the water. It's in the exhibition, bronze and almost 5 feet high. A flat drum found on the floor beside it may have been held between its antlers. There was a small musical ensemble in this chamber, just 2 mouth organs and 7 zithers, maybe bedtime music for 8 players. The chamber had a lacquer deer fitted with the antlers of a real one. Similar deer in Chu tombs sometimes have small drums tenoned into their hindquarters, and this one does have a mortise in the right place there. Here the lid of the outer coffin is being removed, and here the lid of the inner coffin. Inside are the Marquis's bones and his jades. Lying on top of the lid is a mass of decayed silk. The silk is not much more than sludge. It has rotted, and I don't know what it was doing there. But there were jades in it or on it, including this one. The Marquis went into his coffin with 200 jades and no doubt dressed in splendid silk robes, but he and his robes rotted away. You can see his skull at top left. Most of the jades in the tomb were in his coffin, including this pendant at his waist. This is in the exhibition, a single piece of jade with 5 moving parts permanently interlocked, and this pair of openwork plaques there up there. While you're looking at the remains of the Marquis, let me remind you that the figures holding his bells are not portraits of him, they are anonymous servants. His bronze casters clearly could have made statues of him, but he didn't ask them to. Before the 2nd century BC, we have no identifiable portrait of anybody in China. We Westerners take portraiture for granted, but there have been cultures that didn't have a function for portraits. Here you see both of Yi's coffins with the former director of the Hubei Provincial Museum on the right. He is one of the predecessors of our next speaker. The coffins have faded. In pictures taken just after they were excavated, they were much more colorful. This is the inner coffin, lacquered wood, spectacular, and absolutely unique. It's painted with a chaotic assortment of weird beings. This is a drawing of one end. Since we don't have an ancient Zeng informant to tell us, we have no idea what's going on here. True coffins are usually undecorated. The only known coffin as splendid as Marquis Yi's is from the tomb of a Chu minister who died in 316 BC. And it's completely different. It has a complicated but perfectly symmetrical pattern of large repeating units 1.5 units on this side, 1.5 on the other side, and 1.5 on top. Lacquering is a slow process. These coffins took months or even years to make. Now, Yi's tomb is a time capsule. It's a sample of 5th century Zeng material culture at the highest level of society. Now that you've had a glimpse of its contents, and there was much more, let me step back and ask a couple of questions about this sample. How representative is it? And representative of what? Does it show us everything that we might have seen in Yi's palace? And would we see all the same things at the court of a Chu king or at the court of a king of North China? Let me answer the second question first. We simply don't know what an equally rich, equally well-preserved Chu tomb or northern tomb would contain because we don't have one. Bronze and jade survive well everywhere, but materials like wood perish in the north. The timbers of burial chambers crumble to dust, and so do the wooden cores of lacquer objects. Lacquers disintegrate and bamboo slips disappear without a trace. So a 4th century tomb, a royal tomb near Beijing, had vessels of both bronze and lacquer. This is one of the bronzes, and this is one of the lacquers. The white things here are gadgets like the things on the top of that lid. They were made of bronze, and they survive quite nicely. The rest of the vessel crumbled to painted flakes. The same tomb had a lacquer coffin, or maybe 2 lacquer coffins. The excavators aren't sure because they only found flakes. In Yi's tomb, we've got lacquers of every description, including coffins and musical instruments, and we've even got bamboo slips. That is nothing you see here would have survived in a northern tomb. That is a north-south bias of the archaeological sample. The depth and tight seal of Yi's tomb allowed it to fill with water fairly soon after the funeral, but then kept the water there with no seasonal outflow-inflow, and the mild climate of the south kept the temperature stable. In a permanently waterlogged tomb, the organisms that are the first agents of decay use up whatever oxygen is dissolved in the water and then die. Oxygen-hating, methane-producing bacteria then take over. When they are killed by the methane they produce, decay stops. But this doesn't mean that Yi's tomb is a perfect, fully representative sample of Zeng court culture. At least one important perishable did perish. For many materials, water is a good preservative, but the water in Yi's tomb was slightly alkaline. That's bad for proteins, and silk is mostly protein. So was the Marquis. One of his lacquer chests has a label saying that it contained clothing, but the clothing didn't survive. So we don't know how Zeng Marquises dressed. The preservation of silk requires very special burial conditions, and there is no substantial find of silk anywhere in China until about 300 BC in a small burial at the Chu capital. So at this point, I want to move to that Chu burial. On the left, you see the shaft, the burial shaft, and on the right, you see the timber box that's at the bottom of it. On the right, the lid has been removed, and you see 3 compartments, 1 for the coffin and 2 for the grave goods. The tomb on the right is smaller than Marquis Yi's coffin. Its occupant was middle class, maybe the wife of an official. The only notable bronzes in her tomb, or the most notable bronzes, were a serving spoon with silver inlay and a bronze mirror with a silk tassel to hold it by. She had only one bronze vessel with decoration, and it's nothing to write home about. Marquis Yi had about 10 tons more bronze than she had. She had a few lacquers, mostly wine cups. 3 of her cups are decorated. The main design here is a random branching shape cropped by an oval border. That's a lacquer painter's invention, something you would never see on a bronze. As for jades, this woman had a grand total of 1 bead. Her possessions are pretty ordinary until we get to her clothes. Here, the lid of her coffin has been removed to reveal a quilt and a robe tucked around the bundle that contained her body. The bundle had 9 silk ties. Beneath them were 13 layers of silk that the excavators had to unwrap before they came to the fully clothed body of the woman. She wore 2 quilted outer robes, a lined inner robe, and an unlined skirt, quilted trousers, and quilted shoes. Some of her silks have complex woven patterns. Some are embroidered. I only have time for 2 embroideries. This one was done in at least 5 colors on a pale plain weave silk. A plump bird with outspread wings faces us, but its legs are turned sideways. With the fountain of plumes on the top of its head, it looks like something out of Dr. Seuss's If I Ran the Zoo. And in a design whose whole purpose was to give delight, I don't think it's wrong to see an imagination akin to his. You're looking at a detail of a robe. Here is a replica. The collar and lapels are a polychrome weave that needs to be seen up close. The embroidery is more relaxed, less intense. This drawing shows the pattern unit. The cascade of flowering vines next to the upper bird sprouts from a wingtip of the lower bird. The embroiderer sewed this unit over and over again onto a bolt of cloth 19 inches wide. Then a tailor cut the bolt up to make a robe. Patterns that are randomly cropped and joined are normal in clothing, and we take them for granted. In other materials, cropping is less natural, and when it occurs, on that lacquer wine cup, for example, it's probably always taking inspiration from textiles. The exhibition includes a fragment of this embroidery. It's done on pale white gauze. In a garment, the effect would be transparency veiled by patterns. The pattern is a tangle of tigers, dragons, and birds done in 7 colors. And it's worth a close look because the tangle is wonderfully contrived. This tassel belongs to a bird above the tiger. These feathers belong to a bird below the tiger. Unfortunately, the only image I have of the whole pattern unit is discolored, so brace yourselves. This is a sleeve that the tailor made by cutting pieces from an embroidered bolt and sewing them together. The seams are here. So let me focus just on that one section of the bolt. The colors of most of the animals have faded, but you can spot pairs of tigers that face toward and away from each other in alternation. The tigers that face away from each other are enclosed in lozenges. The tigers that face toward each other are to the sides. The pattern begins to repeat after about 11 inches. That's the height of a lozenge. Now look at one lozenge. The seams between this piece and its neighbors are, This pattern consists entirely of tigers, birds, and dragons. The birds are the key to understanding the pattern because they form the lozenges. Their plumage supplies the structure into which the other animals are fitted. So let's find a bird. Each side of the lozenge is a bird. So let's try this one. The circle at the center of the side is the bird's body. Here is its head facing upward, its neck, its breast. It's running. It has one leg forward here and one leg backward down here. Its tail continues around and closes the circle and then crosses under the neck of the bird and runs up to end in a spray of feathers that lies on top of the tiger there. It has a fantastic crest dangling from the back of its head with tassels, and that runs down here to end in this tassel, which lies over the tail of this tiger. The side of the lozenge is completed by two sprays of plumage that issue from the bird's neck here and from its breast here. So that is the end of that side of the lozenge. Everything that is not a bird is a tiger or a dragon. Everything that is not a bird is a tiger or a dragon, yes. There are two kinds of dragon, and they're all symmetrically paired, but I will spare you. Returning to the whole lozenge, this side matches that side, and this side matches that side. The heads of the two birds at the top are inside the lozenge. The heads of the two birds at the bottom are outside the lozenge. Each bird has one foot inside the lozenge and the other foot in another lozenge, there and there. The tigers that face away from each other are in the center of a lozenge. The tigers that face toward each other are in different lozenges. Now, the neat thing about this pattern is that if you cut two or more lengths from the bolt and put them side by side properly aligned, the pattern continues uninterrupted across the seams. The lozenges tile. The pattern spreads endlessly in all directions. The tigers in a lozenge face away from each other, but toward tigers in adjacent lozenges. Every bird has feet in two adjacent lozenges. I have no idea how you design a pattern like this. It was used for the end papers of the exhibition catalog, no doubt because it tiles so nicely and you can crop it to suit any space. However, this tailor aligned only two pieces. This piece and this one are upside down. Look at the tigers. The silks from this burial bring me to the problem of characterizing a Zeng culture and a Chu culture and the cultures of the North and South. Archaeology has given us a staggeringly rich sample of the material culture of ancient China, but the sample is biased, and generalizing from a biased sample is risky. Did northern silks look like these? Who knows? And forget about North China, what can a unique find tell us about Chu silk? Hundreds of tombs have been excavated at the Chu capital, and this is the only one in which silk survives intact. If the wife of a middling official wore clothes like these, what did her betters wear? Remember, these two things came from this tomb. Let me show you the tombs of a Chu lord and lady, same date, 200 BC. What did the lady in this tomb wear? We don't know. The exhibition includes her crossbow, but not her clothes. Our sample of lacquer is much better than our sample of silk. In the South, at least, lacquers survive in abundance. But for decorated lacquer coffins, we've only got two in the Warring States period. A Zeng coffin from 433 BC and a Chu coffin from 316 BC, and they are completely different. Is that a time difference, or a difference between Zeng and Chu, or something else? Discussions of Chu art often take their examples from Marquis Yi's tomb, but are the contents of these two tombs, are Zeng art and Chu art really interchangeable? And did northern lacquer coffins look like either of these? We have no idea. We have a couple of early Han coffins from former Chu territory, 168 BC, and they are spectacular, but they're not a bit like either of these. The deer on the left comes from one of the big tombs I just showed you. These drum supports are common in Chu tombs, and Marquis Yi had two of them, so this is something that Zeng and Chu shared. Did northern states also have them? We don't know. Did the Chu king have anything like this? In North and South alike, tuned sets of bells are standard features of high-ranking tombs, but there's only one set that has inscriptions about music theory, and there's only one set that's supported by bronze figures. There is so much in Yi's tomb that's unparalleled that it's hard not to feel that something very special was going on in his court. But how would I go about proving that? Which things in his tomb were unique to him, which were shared with Chu, and which were shared also with the North? Those questions are especially hard to answer about things made of perishable materials. The most obvious case of sample bias is the archaeological record of writing. The oldest bamboo documents yet found in China are from Yi's tomb, but nobody would conclude that writing on slips was invented in Zeng or that the Zeng court had a monopoly on it. Some texts found in Chu tombs are the earliest known copies of northern books. We know better than to conclude that writing on bamboo was a southern thing just because bamboo books are found only in the South. Yet, when we think of Chu as an exotic culture of mysterious spirits and colorful luxury goods, aren't we doing just that? Isn't it suspicious that when we speak of the exotic material culture of Chu, the examples we point to are things made in materials that perish under northern burial conditions? Chu culture looks less exotic if we judge by bronzes and jades. How different were the Phoenix kingdoms from the northern states? I don't know, but I doubt that they were as different as we have fallen into the habit of believing. The problem we face is this, and it's a real dilemma. To construct a picture of ancient China from archaeology or texts, you have to generalize from the evidence you have, and that evidence is always incomplete. Generalizing means assuming that the courts you don't know anything about were more or less like the courts you do know something about. In other words, it means assuming that your evidence is representative. But assuming that your evidence is representative homogenizes ancient China, and it's equivalent to assuming that no future archaeological discovery will surprise you. Everybody who assumed that in 1977 got a shock in 1978 when Marquis Yi's tomb was opened. Thank you. Thank you.